Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the IRCC webinar on study permit processing. As you all know, the study permit processing for IRCC has been constantly undergoing changes since the COVID-19 pandemic, and we are trying to do regular webinars so that we can keep you updated with all the information. So in our webinar today, we will have a presentation followed by a series of questions and answers, which will mostly be a lot of generic questions that we have been receiving from prospective students, and also questions that we will be receiving from you today. So please continue sending us your questions in the Q&A part of your panel and not the chat part. And remember that we will only be answering generic questions and not case-specific questions. And to begin our presentation, we have with us Shikhir Gupta, who is the Outreach Officer for IRCC Chandigarh. My name is Anindita Buragohai, and I'm the Outreach Officer for IRCC Delhi, and I welcome you all to the webinar today. So without any further ado, I will hand over the mic to Shikhir now to start the presentation.
Thanks, Anandita. Before I begin, can you please confirm if my voice is clear and I'm audible?
Yes, Shikhir, you're audible.
Thanks, Anandita. A very good morning, everyone, and thank you for tuning into our webinar on study permit processing during the COVID-19 pandemic. My name is Shikhir, and I'm the Outreach Officer at the Consulate General of Canada in Chandigarh. As Anandita mentioned, that the purpose of this webinar is to inform you about the changes to study permit applications and current travel restrictions in view of the ongoing pandemic. The target audience for this webinar are students from India who are interested in pursuing a Canadian post-secondary education. Before we begin, please note that the contents of this webinar are valid only as of today. For the most current information on IRCC processes and travel restrictions to Canada, please visit our website www.canada.ca/immigration. So now let's begin. We realize that international students make significant cultural and social contributions to Canada. They also generate more than 21 billion in economic activity. Since the onset of the pandemic, IRCC has implemented a number of temporary policy changes to support and reassure international students and designated learning institutes. The fall 2020 semester has by far the largest international student intake throughout the academic year, and this is fast approaching. The most recently implemented measures were introduced on July 14 and are aimed at this upcoming cohort. The changes will continue Canada's reputation as a premier destination for international students, and they will demonstrate the importance for the international student program and contributions international students make to Canada. We strongly encourage students to still consider studying at Canadian institutions, even if many DLIs have moved their fall 2020 semester to an online format. Moving on, our agenda for today will cover the following topics. First is that why you should consider studying in Canada. Second is that how the application process works. Third are the restrictions to travel to Canada. Fourth is the exemptions to those travel restrictions. Fifth are the processing changes due to COVID-19, which include a two-step review process, the student direct stream, eligibility to work, authorized leave during studies, and the impact on the postgraduate work permit program. Sixth, we'll cover some fraud trips, and last but not the least, what you need to know before traveling to Canada. We will end the presentation with the question and answer session. Please use the Q&A box to send us a question, and we will go through them after the presentation. Before we get started on some of the changes put in place, let's focus on why you should study in Canada. First is that we have world-renowned qualifications. Canada is recognized worldwide for our outstanding quality of educational institutes. Our educators are highly trained and bring diverse perspectives to the classroom. At the university level, 2 out of every 5 academics hold at least one international degree. And we have 11 of the top 250 universities worldwide. Next is affordable education. Canada is known to having some of the lowest university tuition fee among English-speaking countries. Whatever your budget may be, you will find something just right for you in a diverse range of education options. Third is safe and multicultural communities. We are proud to say that the warm and friendly stereotype about Canadians is true. When you come to Canada, you will find a welcoming country with a unique Canadian culture that embraces diversity. Last but not least is the path to a promising future. Canadian college and university students graduate with a very strong earning potential. In this slide, we will cover some of the restrictions on travel to Canada. To protect Canadians from the outbreak of COVID-19, the Government of Canada implemented travel restrictions that limit travel to Canada. Until further notice, most foreign nationals cannot travel to Canada, even if they have a valid visitor visa or an electronic travel authorization. These restrictions stop non-essential or non-discretionary travel to Canada. In this slide, let's look at the travel restriction exemptions for students in more detail. Not all students will be able to travel to Canada under the current travel restrictions. To be exempt, you must be in possession of either a study permit visa issued on or before March 18, 2020, or a port of entry letter of introduction which indicates your study permit was approved on or before March 18, 2020. Equally as important, you must also be able to demonstrate that it is essential for you to travel to Canada. For example, you have in-person classes or you are already in the middle of your program of study and need to return to it. You can demonstrate this by providing a recently dated letter from your designated learning institute that explains why you physically need to be in Canada for the fall semester. These documents must be provided to the airline at the time of boarding and to CBSA once you reach a port of entry in Canada. Failure to do this may result in denied boarding for your flight or being forced to return from Canada at your own expense. As I mentioned in the previous slide, we will not provide any travel authorization letters for students. All you need to travel is your visa or port of entry introduction letter and evidence of your essential need to travel. This is very important to note that you should not travel to Canada until at most 3 weeks before the start date of your class, for which your physical presence in Canada is required. For those who have already been issued visas for a previous semester but were not able to travel to Canada to attend, please send us a copy of your new letter of acceptance and advise us of your new start date. You can send these documents to us via the web form. Now let's look at what processing changes have been introduced as a result of the pandemic. Visa application centers, also known as VACs, are currently closed. This means we are unable to accept any paper application submissions. As such, only online submissions are being accepted. On the IRCC website, we normally publish processing times for each of our missions for all our lines of business. Please note that these processing times are no longer accurate, as there are processing delays due to reduced staff at the mission. That being said, IRCC is working very hard to process all visa applications in time for the fall 2020 semester. To do this, we need your help by submitting your application as early as possible and submitting all of the required documents as soon as possible. We are aware of many service disruptions that are causing delays in submitting a complete application. For example, we know that VACs remain closed. This means there is no mechanism to submit biometrics at this time. We also know that panel physicians are operating at limited capacity. This means that it may take longer for you to obtain an appointment to complete your immigration medical exam. We also know that some businesses and schools remain closed or are operating at limited capacity. This means that it may take longer for you to obtain the supporting documents you need for your application. All of that being said, we will not refuse any applications for non-compliance or failure to submit the requested documents at this time. This means you do not have to worry about the deadlines specified in the request letters sent to you. However, note that we will not be able to complete the processing of your application until all required and requested documents have been received, so it is in your favor to submit these documents to us as soon as possible. The exception to this are the three following documents you must provide upfront or your application may be refused. First is the application forms. If you do not have an application, you do not have an application unless you complete the IRCC forms required. Second is the fee. This includes both the study permit processing fee and the biometrics fee. Third is the letter of acceptance, also known as the LOA, from a designated learning institute in Canada. This is mandatory for you to submit with your application. Please note that we cannot physically issue any visas until the WACs reopen because we have no mechanism for two-way transmission of passports between you, the client, and us, the visa office. We are, however, attempting to return passports for any existing paper files at the mission, as we realize this is an important identity document for you. Any documents mailed directly to the mission will be returned to the sender. So please do not attempt to send your passports directly to us. Please wait for the WACs to reopen. So as I previously indicated that only those with visas issued on or before March 18 may travel to Canada under the current travel restrictions. The recently introduced measures address applications which have not yet received approvals as of March 18. Here are those measures. First, if a program of study will qualify you for a postgraduate work permit, also known as PGWP, and part of your course, that is fall 2020 semester, has been moved to an online format because of the pandemic, the time spent on the online portion while outside of Canada will still count towards your time on PGWP. However, the online portion must be 50% or less of the entire program of study. This means you will need to complete at minimum half of the program in Canada for all that time to count towards your PGWP. Second is that online study permit applications will be prioritized. A two-stage approval process will provide some breathing room for students who are not yet able to provide biometrics or medicals. The first stage is the approval in principle, also known as AIP. This is essentially the eligibility assessment of your application. If you receive an AIP approval, your online course time will count towards time for your PGWP. This means you do not have to wait for a visa to be issued. Stage 2 refers to the admissibility and final decisions on your application. In cases of approval, this results in visa issuance. Please also note that AIP approval is not a guarantee of a visa. Stage 2 includes admissibility decisions. For example, you may be refused a visa despite having an AIP because you failed your medical exam. Now, this chart explains the process from start to entering Canada. Prior to applying for your study permit, you should carefully, first of all, research designated learning institutions. Second is to decide if you are traveling alone. Third is to prepare a budget and proof of funds. Next is to gather all your important documents. If you want assistance regarding the study permit process, ensure you seek the help of certified immigration representative. After you receive your letter of acceptance, you can apply for a study permit. This is where the process has changed a bit and where your decision-making process is broken up into two stages. As well, even after being issued a visa, you may still not be able to enter Canada if you are not exempt from the travel restrictions. As you can see, your approval will be broken up in two stages. And even if you are issued a visa, you still will not be able to enter Canada unless you are exempt from the travel restrictions. So the AIP applies to applications which have not yet received a final decision as of March 18. It refers to eligibility assessment of your application. Essentially, it means that even though you are still missing medicals or biometrics, you may still be able to receive an AIP on your application. The criteria for this assessment has not changed, neither the requirements nor how an officer makes that assessment. Here are the criteria. First is that you are a genuine student. This This means that you have demonstrated the academic and language capability through the submission of your previous academic scripts and IELTS and TOEFL scores, and that you are able and qualified to complete a program of study in Canada. Number two is that you have been accepted by a DLI in Canada. This means you have submitted a valid letter of acceptance from a designated learning institute in Canada. Number three is that you have sufficient funds to pay for your studies, living expenses, and transportation without working. This means you have submitted financial evidence of liquid funds to pay for these three things for the first year of school and demonstrated via explanation and proof of how you intend to pay for these three things, that is tuition, transportation, living expenses, for all the remaining years of study. And number four is that you will leave Canada by the end of your authorized stay. This means you have demonstrated through evidence and explanation what your ties are to your home country, which will motivate you to leave Canada once your visa expires. Once you receive AIP in your application, the letter will be sent to you electronically to relay this information to you. You may also receive requests for biometrics and medicals if you have not yet submitted them. This slide provides a list of basic documents required to receive an AIP for the SDS and non-SDS stream. Let's look at the SDS list of mandatory requirements for the AIP. First, you need a valid letter of acceptance from a DLI in Canada. Second, you need to provide IELTS results demonstrating 6 in each band. Only in-person test results will be accepted. We are not accepting online test results. You need to show a receipt or documentation from the DLI that tuition has been paid for the first year. If you also have scholarships or grants, you should provide documentation to demonstrate this as a part of this requirement. Fourth is that you need to provide a receipt of a GIC of 10,000 Canadian dollars. Fifth is that you have to submit your most recent secondary or post-secondary school transcripts. And for Quebec-bound students, you need a CAQ. For the non-SDS stream, these are the mandatory documents for AIP. First is to submit a valid LOA from a designated learning institute in Canada. Second is to provide IELTS or TOEFL test results. No online English test results will be accepted. Third is to show documentation that demonstrates you have liquid funds and enough money to pay for tuition, living expenses, and transportation for the first year of school, plus an explanation and evidence of how you intend to pay for all of the remaining subsequent years of school without relying on working in Canada. Fourth is that you need to submit your most recent secondary or post-secondary school transcripts. Fifth, last but not the least, you need a CAQ for Quebec-bound students. Additionally, we would recommend you to submit a letter explaining why you chose your program of study. Admissibility assessments are made after AIP and before visa issuance. They include assessments such as medical, criminality, and biometrics, among other things. This means that you must, number one, provide biometrics. Number two, complete your immigration medical exam. Number three, answer all questions truthfully and completely. This includes declaring all previous visa refusals for all countries, providing all of your background history for the last 10 years, and being truthful about any previous arrests and criminal history. Lastly, you must always make it a point to submit authentic documents only. It is important to note that the documents required to submit under SDS has not changed. We realize that due to service disruptions, you may not be able to submit all of the required documents to qualify under the stream. Examples of this may be upfront medicals, IELTS results, GICs, etc. If you are unable to submit a required document, for example, upfront medicals, your application will be moved to the non-SDS stream. Many of you will have questions about working in Canada and how the changes may affect your opportunity to be employed. So why is postgraduate work permit or PGWP important for many students? Work experience provides a better opportunity to gain the language skills and work experience required to apply for permanent resident status in Canada. As well, Canada has some of the highest salary for workers, and if you decide to return to your home or work in another country, people who gain Canadian work experience are often able to demonstrate that they have skills and knowledge and critical thinking required to do the job. It is worth noting that to obtain a 3-year postgraduate work permit, the applicant must have completed a minimum of 2 years of post-secondary studies. You can complete more than one program and combine their length to determine your PGWP length, but in that situation, each program has to be PGWP eligible, including being at least 8 months in length. This section applies to students already in Canada. Essentially, if a student switched to part-time studies or had to take a break in studies, for example, the spring semester may have been cancelled due to the pandemic, they may still continue to work on and off campus provided that they were previously a full-time student and already authorized to work on or off campus pre-pandemic. For off-campus work, the maximum limit is still 20 hours per week during the academic session and full-time during regular academic breaks. For students who are in essential services, this could include jobs in the health sector, for example. They can work more than 20 hours per week up till August 31st. To qualify for this, they need a valid study permit, must currently be in an academic session, authorized to work on or off campus, and must be working in an essential job. Those who are not yet in Canada, a common question we are asked is if you can go to Canada and work those maximum 20 hours per week while taking online classes for the fall semester. The short answer to this is no. I would like to remind you of what we discussed in earlier slides regarding what students need to demonstrate in order to travel to Canada. Unless your physical presence is required for your studies in the fall semester, it is not essential for you to travel to Canada at this time. Additionally, only students with visas issued on or before March 18 can travel to Canada under the current travel restrictions. This slide refers to online courses and the postgraduate work permit. You're still eligible for a postgraduate work permit if you can't travel to Canada at this time due to travel restrictions, and you began your studies but left Canada temporarily and are now continuing studies online outside of Canada, or you applied for a study permit before starting your study program in an online format in 2020. If you're in this situation, you can begin your classes while outside Canada and complete up to 50% of your program. If you decide to study and work in Canada, you may then decide to make Canada your permanent home. How the system works is you enter your profile and this will show you how many comprehensive ranking system points you have based on your education, work experience, language ability, and some other factors. On a regular basis, IRCC invites the candidates with the most points in the express entry pool to apply for permanent residence through one of these programs. If you are invited to apply for permanent residence, your invitation will tell you which program you need to apply through. There are other options to apply to immigrate permanently as a worker outside of express entry system, including the rest of the provincial nominee programs and the Atlantic Immigration Pilot. Now let's look at the conditions by which you must abide before air travel to Canada. The airline will require following documents from you. Number 1 is your passport. Number 2 is a valid study permit visa issued on or before March 18. And number 3 are documents to demonstrate that your travel to Canada is essential. Failure to provide any of these documents may result in your being denied boarding. Additionally, you will be required to pass a health check performed by airline officials just before your flight. If you're showing any COVID-19 symptoms, you may also be denied boarding. If you are approved for boarding, note that you must wear a non-medical mask or face covering upon arrival in Canada. All travelers must undergo a health check upon arrival in Canada. It is also mandatory that all passengers arriving in Canada must self-quarantine for 14 days. This means that all travelers must, number one, have a plan to self-quarantine for 14 days. Number two, confirm and provide evidence that they have a suitable place to quarantine. This means providing an address and explaining how they intend to self-quarantine if other people live at the same location. Lastly, explain how you intend to respect the quarantine plan. For example, explain how you intend to receive essential items such as food. Please do not travel to Canada unless you have a viable quarantine plan. Failure to comply has consequences, which include a fine up to 750,000 Canadian dollars, 6 months in prison, or being deemed inadmissible, removed from Canada, and banned from entering Canada for 1 year. In this section, we want to inform you of various fraud activities and misinformation related to immigration applications. You may scan the QR code on the screen as I speak. Number one is to protect yourself and never share your personal information with unauthorized agents. If something sounds too good to be true, in all probability it is. Number two are fraudulent websites and scams. Websites and social media accounts may claim to be from the Government of Canada. Applicants are tricked into transferring money for services that will never be provided to them. Our official website is www.canada.ca/immigration. Third are email scams. Please be informed that IRCC will never send you an email from a private address like Hotmail or Gmail. IRCC addresses always end in .gc.ca or canada.ca. Fourth are telephone scams. Please note that IRCC will never ask you for any sort of payment by telephone. And lastly, unauthorized agents. We always say that you do not have to use a consultant to submit an application. However, if you do choose to use one, make sure that they are legally authorized under Canadian laws to represent you. For more information, please visit our website. For more information, here are the many ways to connect with us and to find out more. We have the IRCC website, that is www.cic.gc.ca. The High Commission website, as mentioned, is www.india.gc.ca. And you can also follow us on our social media handles on Facebook and Twitter by the name of Canada in India, and our YouTube channel for important videos for various frauds and other tips. We will now move to the question and answer session, where we will answer your questions which you've typed in the Q&A box. Anandita, can I please request you to take over the Q&A session?
Thank you, Shakil. And hope the information that you provided was helpful for all our participants. So we now move on to the question and answer session. We will actually try and demarcate this session into two parts. We're trying to look at those queries which are very generic and which will probably address questions being asked by a lot of people. So at the moment, while I'm speaking, the number of questions are 496 already. You might understand that we will not be able to answer each and every one of your questions. Also, because a lot of the questions that we are receiving are very similar. So what we're trying to do is we will try and club most of the questions which are similar and answer them in the most generic way possible, so that it is not only helpful for the person who has asked the question, but also for the other people who might have a similar kind of query. So first of all, I'll be talking about the essential travel part of the restriction, which seems to have confused a lot of people, or quite a lot of people are still unclear about what it is. So the question is, how do I demonstrate that my travel to Canada is essential? and especially when I have never lived in Canada. So this is especially asked a lot by people who are going to Canada for the first time to start their courses or were planning to go to Canada for the first time. So what we would suggest is that you consult your designated learning institute to determine if your entry into Canada is essential. And if your entry into Canada is essential, the institute should provide you with a letter clearly outlining why you must be in Canada. Neither IRCC nor the High Commission provides travel authorization letters for students. So please remember this. This was also something which Shikhar mentioned in his presentation. The next question is, I'm a student in Canada who traveled to India in March. I was not able to get a return flight after the lockdown took place. Can I travel to Canada now? The answer is yes. An essential reason to travel to Canada is if you were previously living in Canada and are returning home. So this will be specifically helpful for returning students. The next question is, my Wi-Fi is not reliable from outside Canada. So can I enter Canada to study? We understand that every student situation is unique and everyone resides in different areas where the internet connectivity could vary. It is important for you to consult with your designated learning institute regarding options for studying online. If your internet bandwidth is not suitable, you should look at different options for studying online. If your bandwidth is not suitable, you should look at different options such as upgrading your Wi-Fi connection. Unless your DLI advises you that in-person attendance is essential, you cannot enter Canada at this time. The next question is, what if my DLI does not provide online courses and requires me to be in Canada, but I received my approval only after March 18, 2020? In this case, you will not be able to travel to Canada under the current travel restrictions, even if your DLI requires you to be in Canada. And in this case, what we would advise is that you should consider deferring your course or deferring your studies. The next question is, can I still go to Canada and work 20 hours a week off campus if my classes are online? The very short answer to this is no. If your classes are online, you would not have an essential reason to travel to Canada. The next question is, I was not allowed to board the aircraft leaving for Canada even though I have a valid study permit issued before March 18. What should I do? The final determination to allow a traveler to board an aircraft is made by the airline, often in consultation with the Canada Border Services Agency. It is your responsibility as a traveler to have documentation that clearly shows that your travel to Canada is essential. Now I'll be addressing a few questions about the two-stage processing policy, which is currently in place temporarily. So the first question is, what documents should I submit before September 15th, 2020 to be eligible for the two-stage processing? So there are three mandatory documents you must submit. The completed IRCC application form, proof that your fees has been paid for your application and also for your biometrics, a letter of acceptance from your designated learning institute in Canada. In addition to this, you should also submit as many of the required supporting documents as possible at the same time as your application submission to avoid delays in processing. The next question is the two-stage processing available for winter 2021 intake or winter 2021 start dates? No. The two-stage processing will only be for programs that start or have started in the spring, summer, or fall of 2020. The next question is, how do I obtain an approval in principle? Is this the first stage of approval? The approval in principle happens in the stage 1 of the review of your application. Approval in principle, or AIP as we commonly call it, is granted when an officer is satisfied that you are eligible to enter Canada and you are eligible to be a student in Canada, that you will abide by the terms and conditions of your study permit and leave Canada after your authorized stay. The next question is, what does an officer consider when reviewing an application to grant or deny AIP? So the officer weighs a variety of factors, including whether or not you have an established family in India. Say, for example, someone who was already working here, had a stable employment here with a good salary. Then the other thing that they might look at is, does your course of study make sense? You should be able to explain why you are choosing a particular course of study. And you can do so by adding a letter of motivation in your study permit application. The officer will also definitely look at if you have sufficient language skills to show that you are able to succeed in your studies in Canada and live in Canada where the primary languages are English and French. So you have to be fluent in either one of those languages. The officer will also look at your funds and see whether you have sufficient funds for your studies and living expenses without relying on working in Canada. So the funds that you show as part of your application should justify that you have enough money to study and live in Canada if a situation arises where you cannot work in Canada. So working will be your additional benefit, but you should not rely on the fact that you are going to take all your expenses, use all your expenses to live and study in Canada by working there. So that should never be your option when you're applying for your study permit application. And then the officer will also definitely look at the valid letter of acceptance from your designated learning institute. This is, of course, one of the most mandatory documents that you need to submit in your study permit application. So now, what documents must I submit to receive AIP? That is the next question. So if you are trying to apply under the student direct stream, then the documents that you need to submit are the letter of acceptance from your TLI, your IELTS test score, where you have scored a minimum of 6 band in each of the 4 modules, your entire tuition fee paid for the first year, a guaranteed investment certificate for 10,000 Canadian dollars, your most recent secondary or post-secondary school transcripts, and if you are a Quebec-bound student, then you will definitely need to add your CAQ. What about the people who are not applying through the student direct stream? What documents do they submit when they are planning to receive an AIP? Documents that they need to submit are letter of acceptance from their DLI, their IELTS, TOEFL, or PTE test results, evidence of financial ability to pay for their tuition, their transportation, and other living expenses in Canada, their most recent secondary or post-secondary school transcripts, and again, for Quebec-bound students, their CAQ. The next question is, if I'm missing a document like medicals, which is something which is very mandatory for SDS applications, can I still qualify for SDS? The answer is no. If you are not able to submit all the documents under SDS, the officer will assess your application as a regular non-SDS application. The next question is, what do I do if I cannot submit a document within the requested time frame? So, given the current situation, IRCC will not refuse any applications for non-compliance or failure to submit a requested document in the current times. Please submit the documents, however, as soon as you are able to, even if the deadline for the submission has elapsed. That is okay, but you need to submit it as soon as you are able to. So, for example, currently, when you apply online, you might receive a biometric submission letter where you have a deadline for the submission of your biometrics. But because VACs are closed in India, you might not be able to submit the biometrics right now. IRCC is aware of that. So, what we would request you to do is the moment VACs open in India, you go ahead, submit your biometrics, and then send us your biometric information. However, in this case, you have to know that we will not be able to complete the processing of your application until all the required and requested documents have been received at our end. So this is something that you must remember. The next question is, how will I know if AIP is granted? So how will you know this? A letter confirming your stage 1 approval or AIP will be sent to your online account. The letter may request you to complete the rest of your requirements like your biometrics and your medicals if you have not already completed them. And only after that you will be issued a study permit. The next question is, if I am granted AIP, can I assume that once I complete my biometrics and medicals, I will get a student visa? The answer is no. Granting of an AIP is not the same as being granted a visa. The officer will need to establish that you meet admissibility requirements. Note that a second stage refusal is uncommon, provided that you are truthful in your application. that you have not provided any fraudulent documents, and that you comply with any additional requests immediately. So yes, a second stage refusal is not very common, but just getting an AIP does not guarantee you a visa. So please be very clear of this demarcation. The next question is, when will my stage 2 admissibility decision be completed? The answer to this is, your stage 2 admissibility decision will be assessed after AIP and before visa issuance. This includes an assessment of your medical, your biometrics, as well as security and criminality background questions. If your application contains all the documents required for the stage 2 assessment already when you submit them in the first stage, it will be assessed at the same stage as the stage 1. Note that we will not finalize any applications for approval until VACs reopen. The next question is, what requirements need to be completed to receive approval for stage 2 admissibility decision? In order to conduct this assessment, you must provide biometrics, complete your immigration medical exam, answer all the questions in your application form truthfully and completely, and this includes declaring all your previous visa refusals for other countries, providing all background history for the last 10 years. And a very important thing is, you must submit only authentic documents. The next question is, what if my schooling or what if my courses start before I receive my AIP? This seems to be a very common question that we're receiving today. So the answer to this is, you can start school online prior to obtaining your AIP. If you receive your AIP after you have started school, all the time will still be counted towards your post-graduation work permit or PGWP, provided that you submitted your study permit application before September 15. So remember this date. This is the date which is currently in place. And as mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, all the information we are providing today is only valid as of today. Will I receive a refund of my tuition fees if my application is refused when I am studying online in India with a DLI in Canada? So for something like this, you need to consult with your DLI or your school, because only they will be the people who will be able to confirm their refund policy. The next series of questions that I'm looking at refer to processing times. We are receiving a lot of questions regarding processing times today. So I'm just looking at generic questions, and like I said, not taking up any case-specific information. So the first question is processing for SDS study permit application faster than non-SDS applications? As you know, there have been many service disruptions due to COVID-19, and we have not been able to maintain our standard processing times. We are working through our inventory of applications right now. So right now, IRCC will not refuse any applications for non-compliance or failure to submit the requested documents. However, if you are not able to submit requested documents in a timely manner, we will not be able to complete the processing of your application until all required and requested documents have been received. The next question is, when can I expect a decision on my application? So again, because of service disruptions, we have our processing times have been severely affected, but we are working very hard towards a normal service standard. Applications who merit a refusal are being finalized at this time. So please check your online account or email in case you have already applied and you have received a refusal letter. For those applications who receive a visa approval, they will not be finalized until visa application centers can reopen. And the next question is, when can I submit my passport so I can get my visa? The answer to this is again related to the opening of visa application centers, because you need to wait for visa application centers to reopen to submit your passport for visa issuance. Please make sure that you do not send us any passport directly to our office, because we cannot accept any passports at this time. In case you have sent or end up sending your passport to us, it will be returned to you at your own expense without a visa. So please be very careful. Now I'll move on to addressing a few language-related questions that we have been receiving. So the first question is, can I submit a language proficiency test result that I completed online? Say, for example, Duolingo or IELTS indicator are few tests which are now being introduced since the pandemic. So what if someone wants to submit a test result for one of those online tests? And the question also asks, if my school has accepted my results for my admission, is this sufficient? So your school might have accepted these results as part of your admission, but IRCC will not accept results for any online language tests. There are no changes to the language proficiency assessment on score requirement. The recommended tests are still IELTS and TEF and TCF for French. Test scores from Duolingo or any other online language test will not be accepted for any immigration application purposes, including for study permits. The next question is, what if my IELTS score is expired or about to expire? In a situation like this, we will accept the IELTS results as long as they were valid on the day when you submitted your application. So say, for example, you submitted your application sometime in March, but by now your IELTS results might have expired and you have still not received a response on your application. You do not need to worry because we will be looking at the validity of the IELTS test on the date when you submitted your application. So if you had submitted it in March and it was valid in March, it will be accepted and we will look at it like that. The next question is, does IRCC accept PTE language scores as proof of language ability for a study permit application? It is recommended that you submit language scores indicated on the IRCC website. So you can go there and have a look. However, if you have completed a PTE language test, you may submit your scores to us using the PTE portal. So there is a PTE portal and scores should be submitted through that as much as possible. And when you submit your scores, do not include your username and password in your study permit application. Now, looking at questions which are about deferring your studies. So we've also received a lot of questions regarding deferrals. So what is the first question? The first question is, my application is still pending. What happens if I defer my studies to a later semester? The answer to this, and the short answer to this, is that if you choose to defer your studies, ensure that you have submitted a new letter of acceptance using our web form. And you should do this as soon as possible so we can update it in your study permit application file. The next question is, I received an approval of my study permit but deferred my studies after that. How do I extend my visa? In a situation like this, you will need to apply for a new study permit with updated information. Extensions of study permits are only granted to students already in Canada. So remember that if you are here in India, we will not be able to grant you any extension. The next question is, can I defer my studies after I receive an AIP? And the answer to this is yes. However, you must submit your new letter of acceptance from your DLI as soon as possible. If you plan to change your course of study or decide to study at a different DLI, the officer who is assessing the application or your application may reassess your stage 1 AIP decision. So you have to be aware of this and keep yourself informed about it. Moving on to a set of questions which seem to be very important at this point in time, very relevant, and also we are receiving a lot of questions around this about post-graduation work permits. So a very common question that we seem to have received today is, what percentage of my studies can be online to be eligible to obtain a PGWP or a post-graduation work permit? So the online portion of your course must be 50% or more of your entire program of study. What this means? This means that you will still need to complete at minimum half of your program in Canada for all of the time to count towards your PGWP. The total program of study is calculated based on the number of courses completed in Canada. So please remember this information. The next question is, I have already completed 50% of my program online prior to the fall semester. Can I still obtain a PGWP? And the answer is, if you started your program in spring or summer of 2020 and have already completed 50% of your program online, you need to make a choice depending on two options. So you can either continue to complete the remaining 50% online, and as per the new PGWP norms which were shared in the presentation today, you will still be eligible, or you might still be considered eligible for a PGWP, your full PGWP. Or the other option that you have is you can defer your program of studies so that you can do the remaining 50% in person in Canada. And as of now, both the options will give you the option to have an entire duration of PGWP as you would have if you were to do physical classes in Canada. The next question is, do I have to wait for AIP for courses to count towards PGWP? And the answer to this is no. As long as you have submitted your study permit application before September 15th, the entire fall semester will count towards a PGWP, even if you receive your approval in principle at a later date. Note that you will still have to meet the other eligibility criteria and requirements for PGWP. So this is something that you need to remember. And the final question that I'll address regarding PGWPs is, can I switch from full-time to part-time studies, and will this affect the duration of my PGWP? So for the fall of 2020 semester, you must be enrolled for a full-time study program for that to count towards the PGWP. However, for winter, spring, and summer of 2020, the semester starting in winter, spring, and summer, the duration of your PGWP will not be affected if you became a part-time student because your DLI cancelled or delayed classes due to the COVID-19 public health measures. So with that, I will now stop because I think we seem to have answered a lot of the generic questions that we have been receiving on the Q&A chat box. As I can see, we have received about 1,500 questions right now. So I would now like to hand it over to Ms. Jackie McLean. Jackie is the manager of our client service and exceptional case unit. And Jackie will also address a few more questions that we have received today, but she will try and look at more of the specific questions which might be also helpful for other people. So, Jackie, I would like to hand it over to you, and maybe Shikir is the person who will be asking you the questions.
Thank you, Anandita, and thank you to all who are attending the session today. I think that one thing that I would like to stress before questions is to try and look at the opportunity that it's presenting to study online. Sometimes it's very difficult to move to a different country, to have, living with new people, experiencing a different culture. This is an opportunity for you to assist with your integration almost in a two-step. So you get familiar with the education, you can stay at home while you're studying online, and then once the travel restrictions are lifted, you can travel to Canada and experience part two of your integration process, where you can look for a place to stay, understand how to get the proper documents like a social insurance card, medical, and all the experiences that Canada has to offer at that time. So try to think of this as, although COVID kind of threw us all in a different direction, this is a good opportunity for people to be able to take their time in moving towards integration into Canada. Thank you.
Hi, Jackie. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right. So, Jackie, I think Anandita has pretty much addressed a lot of questions which you received in the Q&A box. Just some of the questions which I think may need answers from you. So I will just begin with the first question. It says that I am an Indian. I have applied for study through Indian agent and got the approval. Currently, I am in Kuwait. Can I apply for SDS category study visa from Kuwait?
I'm sorry, perhaps I don't understand the question.
The question.
Apply for COVID?
He wants to apply for SDS category study visa from Kuwait, but he's an Indian.
I'm sorry, from COVID? I don't, I'm having difficulty.
He wants to apply from the country Kuwait.
Oh, Kuwait.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I didn't understand. So there's particular countries that are offering SDS, and it depends on whether or not you are a citizen of that country. So if you're a citizen of India, you are eligible to apply under the SDS program. So now everything is online. So you're applying online and not at a specific visa application center. So feel free to submit your application and meet the SDS requirements. We are all, even though the processing times now are very similar, because we are definitely trying to prioritize approval in principle, we are still strongly encouraging people to apply through the SDS program. It is very clear the requirements, and a lot of times it's difficult for students to understand what would be the financial requirements in order to receive approval in principle. So if you are thinking of studying in Canada, we do strongly encourage you to submit documents that would qualify you under the SDS program.
All right, thanks, Jackie. The next question is, if AIP is not approved before classes begin next month, would I be able to start and attend classes online? And what would happen to my fee refund if I enroll in the class and later my study permit is refused?
So you are welcome to study online prior to receiving approval in principle. And indeed is stated in the questions, once approval in principle is granted, all of the time that you have study will count towards your PGWP. The second part of that question is, if you are refused at stage 2, will you be eligible for a refund? We strongly suggest that you contact the DLI to find out what their refund policy is.
Thanks, Jackie. So the next question is a question which is coming, in fact, from a lot of participants. It says that, what does it mean by completing 50% of the course in Canada? Does it mean completing half of the duration of the program length in Canada, or completing half of the subjects in Canada?
So the 50% is calculated by the number of courses. So we look at the total amount of courses that you completed in Canada and the total amount of courses that you completed outside of Canada. And the in-Canada courses have to be 50%.
Right. So the next question is also a very common question from a lot of participants. And it says that there has been no update so far in my application, and students who applied before me have received the AIP. What is the pattern or trend being used to process the applications? Is it a random pattern, or applications are being processed in some particular pattern?
We do try and process according to date order. As you are aware, there are the mission in Delhi, Chandigarh, Bangalore. All the paper files have been transferred to the office in Delhi, and we are working with limited staff during that period to process paper applications. So there may be more of a delay regarding those ones submitted through the Visa Application Center, but we are working very hard to get approval in principle to everyone prior to the fall semester starting.
All right. So the next question, Jackie, is that if I defer or change from a 1-year course to a 2-year course, should I submit additional financial documents which covers the 2 years of education using the web form?
Yes, at the same time as you've submitted, so I'm assuming that you submitted your application and now are changing your course of studies where you would require a new letter of acceptance. Am I understanding that correctly, Shakir?
Yeah, that's right.
So if you are changing your course of studies and it is extending the duration, absolutely you should provide the additional financial support, and also clearly explain why you chose to extend your course of studies.
All right, so the next question is a sort of a continuation to the previous one, and it says that if I change my college after getting the AIP, should I submit a written letter explaining the reason for changing the course and the college?
Absolutely. So when the officer makes the eligibility decision, the officer will look at, does the course of studies make sense given your background, your language ability, and what you've indicated as far as why you chose that course of studies. If now you're changing to a different course and a different institution, different duration, and your funding is for the first course, you have to clearly explain and provide documentation regarding why you've changed.
All right, thanks, Jackie. So the next question is that if a student worked outside for India for more than 6 months, does he or she have to submit a PCC to IRCC of that country as well as the Indian PCC?
So if you have lived outside of a country or lived in a country for longer 6 months, and it is a country where you can obtain a police certificate, then you will be required to obtain that with your application. So you can go online and find out what countries those are available.
All right. So the next question is with regard to the new PGWP rules. It says that if my classes are starting from September 5th and it is a 1-year program, then will I be eligible for the PGWP if I complete more than 50% of the program from my home country?
No. So you have to make sure that you complete no more than 50%. If if your ultimate goal is to get the postgraduate work permit, you have to be very careful that 50% of that course is completed in Canada. So that is something that students are going to have to consider.
All right. So the next question is that can IRCC refuse study permit in the second stage on the basis of documents which are already present in the file?
So the second stage of approval is based on your admissibility. So what the officer will be looking at is your medical result, your biometric result, and yes, if the officer discovers at stage 2 that you have submitted not authentic documents, or they found out that your information you provided was not truthful, the officer can refuse at stage 2.
Thanks, Jackie. The next question is that I have enrolled for 8 months PG diploma course, which is beginning in fall 2020. If I begin my online course in fall 2020, or in any case, border restrictions do not lift in January 2021 due to COVID-19, then do I defer my second semester? If I do so, would it impact my PGWP?
If you're deferring your studies, I'm assuming that you might be doing that in order to make sure that you obtain the 50% mark of completing your studies in Canada. And so in that case, it would not affect your PGWP.
All right, so the next question is a little unusual. It says that which factors can lead to a failure in the medical exam? Can high blood pressure condition lead to a failure in the medical immigration exam?
So failure in a medical exam is kind of two-pronged. So the first failure would be if you have a communicable disease, such as something contagious like the Ebola virus. So we very, very, very rarely ever see that. So the second is if you are going to be excessive demand on the healthcare or social healthcare system in Canada. So those would be things such as active tuberculosis. So things that can be managed and are not excessive demand on the social or healthcare system in Canada, you will not be found medically inadmissible.
All right. So the next question, Jackie, is that the High Commission posted that they are reviewing options to reopen VACs in September. Is it some kind of an assurance that VACs will surely open in September, or we will see the High Commission posting the same in September or October?
So the VACs will remain closed for the remainder of August, and at the earliest, VACs will open in September. So the review is to take place in September, and at that time, that is the earliest that the VACs will reopen. But we can't predetermine what the decision will be at that time because they're closely monitoring the situation in all parts of the world where the VACs are currently closed to see whether or not it would be safe to reopen. And if it's safe to reopen, they might look at, is it safe to reopen for passport submission, for biometrics, but perhaps not submitting paper applications. So they'll not only look at, can we reopen the VACs, but they'll also look at what capacity they can reopen the VACs.
Thanks, Jackie. So we have a very interesting question, and also since it's a new document, I thought it may be relevant. Is that how do I know that my approval in principle mail and letter is not a fraudulent letter?
So like most applicants now have applied online. And so the approval in principle letter that you will receive will be through your MyCIC account. So it's very important that if you did apply through an authorized representative, that you have access to your online account because that's where you will receive your approval in principle letter. Even those applicants that submitted an application through the Visa Application Center will receive a lot of their correspondence through their email address. So it's very important that on your application you included the correct email address that will go directly to you.
Thanks, Jackie. So the next question is that you had mentioned that we need to submit English proficiency scores even for non-SDS visas. However, IRCC has tweeted that it is needed only for the SDS stream. What do I have to submit? Do I have to submit the English proficiency for non-SDS or not?
So the reason why that tweet happened is because it was on the Citizenship and Immigration site where that is for everyone across the world. And so in some countries, it might not necessarily be a requirement, such as where the mode of study and the main language in that country is English or French. However, in India, it is strongly recommended that you submit your language scores because that will enable the officer to review to make sure that it is reasonable that you go to study in Canada and that you would be successful. So without providing those scores, that the officer is not able to make that assessment. If you have studied in the U.S., Australia, countries where the mode of language is English or French, in those circumstances, not necessarily would you need to submit your language scores.
Thanks, Jackie. So I think I have one more question for you. It says that I received an online part-time job offer from university to work for 15 to 20 hours per week virtually from India. Can you please confirm if this would or would not impact my PGWP length?
So PGWP is different than when you're talking about working on or off campus, even though, yes, in fact, you're in India. So I don't see how the two connect. Maybe I'm misunderstanding the question, but if you're offered to work for a professor while you're outside of Canada, that would be almost like you would be working while you were studying. So that's separate and apart from the postgraduate work permit process.
Thanks, Jackie. I think we have, as I'm scanning through the questions, Anandita and you have covered almost all the different kinds of questions we've received in the Q&A box. So would you like to close the webinar for today?
Sure. Thank you, Shakir. I just would like to say that I know a lot of your questions, I can see them coming over the computer regarding processing times. And I understand the anxiety that students must be feeling right now, especially when they've invested a lot of time and money and had the plan to, seek this adventure of going to a new country. And yes, it is very stressful, and we're aware of that. And that's why we are working very, very hard to get your decisions as soon as possible. And that is why we're also doing these webinars to try and answer as many questions as possible. So we're all working in a little bit of a different world with the COVID pandemic. So please be patient and do consider continuing to study in Canada, because I believe that in the end, it will be beneficial for you to take the opportunity, regardless if you can enter Canada right now or in the near future. So thank you for considering studying in Canada, and we will continue to provide you with information through our websites and through our Facebook and social media posts.
Thank you, Jackie, and thank you everyone for joining us. With that, we come to the end of the webinar today. Hope you found it informative. And like Jackie said, please continue following us on social media for all the latest and updated information regarding study permit processing and other types of visas. Thank you all and have a good day.